I chose to let the world believe I'd lost everything, no fortune, no influence, no safety net. I arrived at my children's doorsteps with nothing but worn clothes and trembling hands. My daughter, the one living in a mansion I helped pay for, told me she was hosting a charity gala and couldn't have me there looking like that. My son, a celebrated surgeon, pressed $40 into my palm and said he'd call me when things settled down. Only my youngest, the social worker who barely earns enough to cover rent, pulled me inside without hesitation. His wife offered me their bed and, when she thought I wasn't listening, softly mentioned pawning her grandmother's locket so they could feed me properly. The following morning, my lawyer arrived with documents proving my net worth was $58 million. What unfolded after that moment changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. Welcome back to Golden Vengeance. If you're new here, consider subscribing and leaving a like so you don't miss stories like this one. I'd also love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your city or province in the comments below. And before we continue, please note that some elements of this story have been dramatized for emotional impact. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. But the message at the heart of this story is very real, and I believe it's one you need to hear. The click of the lock sliding into place on the other side of that door sounded like a verdict being delivered. Final. Absolute. No appeal. I stood on the heated stone pathway of my daughter's Rosedale estate, the very pathway I'd paid to have installed 4 winters ago, staring at the oak door that had just been closed in my face. A December wind cut straight through my torn jacket, that sharp Toronto cold that carries ice off Lake Ontario and settles deep into your bones. My clothes, a faded coat from Value Village and jeans I'd worn for 4 days straight, offered no real protection. I could smell the staleness of my own unwashed body mixing with the clean bite of winter air. Behind that door was warmth. Behind that door was my daughter, Stephanie. Her house loomed like a page torn from a design magazine, Georgian Revival, cream brick, black shutters, Christmas lights aligned with surgical precision along every roofline. In the circular driveway sat a white Range Rover, the kind of vehicle that costs more than most Canadians earn in 2 years. I knew that price tag because I'd been the one writing checks for her life for as long as I could remember. I'd written the check for the down payment on this house too, $320,000, handed over as a wedding gift to my eldest. Because that's what fathers do, aren't they? They provide. They protect. They make sure their children never feel the panic of not having enough. But standing there now, watching my breath bloom into pale clouds in the freezing air, I understood with terrible clarity what had just happened. Stephanie hadn't seen her father. She'd seen a liability. An embarrassment. A risk to the polished image she'd built like a fortress around herself. I'd caught a glimpse of her through the sidelight window before she opened the door, cream cashmere sweater, diamond earrings sparkling under the chandelier behind her. Those earrings had been my gift for her 40th birthday last spring. $12,000. They glittered beautifully as she explained, with that practiced tone of polite dismissal, that tonight simply wasn't possible. The charity gala committee would be meeting here in an hour, she said. Board members. Prominent families. People who mattered in her world. My presence would be awkward. The worst part wasn't the excuse. It was the fact she hadn't even looked closely enough to recognize me. She'd assessed the situation the way she assessed everything, coldly, efficiently, measuring worth by appearance and social currency, and she'd decided I didn't qualify. The door closed while I was still speaking. Not slammed in anger. Not thrown shut with drama. Just closed with that firm, decisive sound that tells you a line has been drawn. A boundary established. A daughter choosing her status over the man who spent decades bleeding time and effort to give her this life. I stood there, staring at the golden glow behind her windows. Shadows moved inside, caterers, staff, the machinery of her evening continuing. Warm, comfortable, insulated life. Life I had helped build. Life I had naively believed could purchase what truly mattered. The wind picked up, carrying snow flurries that stung my cheeks like tiny needles. I couldn't move yet, because walking away meant admitting what I'd just discovered about my own child. Finally, I pulled my threadbare collar tighter and started down the pathway. My feet ached with every step, blisters from 3 days of walking Toronto streets without proper footwear. But pain has a way of sharpening your thoughts. Pain reminds you you're still alive. Still learning. Still looking for the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. I had 2 more addresses scribbled on a scrap of paper in my pocket. 2 more children. Marcus, my accomplished surgeon's son who had learned to worship reputation above all else. And Daniel, my youngest, the one I had once called a disappointment when he chose social work over the family business. 1 door had closed. 2 remained. 2 more opportunities to discover who my children really were when the man at their threshold had nothing to offer but need. 2 more chances to see whether I had raised human beings capable of love that wasn't transactional or whether I had created something else, something I had been afraid to name. The snow kept falling as I made my way down the pristine sidewalks of Rosedale, leaving footprints that would vanish by morning as though ID never existed at all. Now, let me take you back 3 weeks, to the Thursday evening when everything shifted. It was late November. I sat alone in my corner office on the 22nd floor of First Canadian Place, watching Toronto's skyline transform into a grid of lights against the darkening sky. Spread across my mahogany desk were financial statements, not corporate ones, not company reports, but personal records. A decade of transfers. Gifts. Temporary bailouts that somehow became permanent patterns. Stephanie's name filled page after page. Over $200,000 in the past 3 years alone. The house down payment. The Range Rover when her old BMW started feeling embarrassing at the country club. Investment capital for her husband Bradley's condo development, an idea that failed so completely I'd stopped asking questions just to preserve my blood pressure. Marcus had his own stack. Medical school tuition covered entirely. The townhouse in Yorkville when he finished his residency. Endless short-term loans for investments that never quite panned out. And then there was Daniel. A single page. Tuition at a modest university. A small wedding gift when he married Claire. Almost nothing else. Not because I didn't have the money but because he never asked. That afternoon my phone rang 3 times, each call arriving like a bell marking time. At 2:15, Stephanie's voice came through bright and cheerful, the voice she always used when she wanted something. Dad, Bradley and I are looking at a cottage on Lake Muskoka. Absolutely stunning property. We need about $150,000 for the deposit. The market is insane right now, and we can't miss this opportunity. At 4:45, Marcus called. Clipped. Efficient. Even family sounded like business in his mouth. Father, I need your advice. Actually I need about $75,000. There's a partnership opportunity at the clinic. I'll explain later. Can you transfer it by Monday? No greeting. No how are you feeling? No are you all right? Just the request, placed in front of me like a form to sign. Then at 7:30, Daniel called. Hey, Dad. It's Daniel. Just checking in. Claire and I were talking about you at dinner. How are you doing? Work treating you okay? We should get together soon, maybe Sunday dinner at our place if you're free. That was the moment everything crystallized. 2 children who viewed me as a funding source. One who called simply to hear my voice. I closed my eyes and thought of my wife, Eleanor, gone 9 years now. I could still hear her final words in that hospital room, the way her fingers squeezed mine even as her strength faded. Promise me you'll take care of them, Richard. Give them everything they need. I had spent 67 years building a $58 million legacy trying to honor that promise. But sitting there, staring at those statements, I finally understood something devastating. I had given them everything except what actually mattered. Another memory surfaced, sharp, unwanted, impossible to ignore. Daniel at 22, standing in this very office. The same view behind him. The same mahogany desk between us like a barrier. I want to work with kids in crisis, Dad. Street youth. Kids aging out of foster care. I want to help them find stability. I'd been furious. Furious. You have a business degree. I didn't pay for your education so you could earn $42,000 a year counseling troubled teenagers. He had looked at me with Eleanor's eyes, calm, steady, unshaken. Then maybe you paid for the wrong thing. We barely spoke for 6 months after that. I had been so sure I was right. So convinced that success meant wealth, that providing meant paying. That night, I opened my eyes, picked up my phone, and dialed Graham Patterson, my lawyer of over 30 years, and perhaps the only true friend I had left. Graham, I said, I need your help with something unusual. A pause. How unusual are we talking? I want to vanish. Silence stretched across the line. Long enough that I could hear my own breathing. Then, carefully. Explain what you mean. I told him about the 3 calls. About the numbers on my desk. About the test I felt compelled to conduct before making any final decisions about my will. I told him I needed to know whether the children I had raised deserved the legacy I had built. Whether I had raised people who understood that love can't be measured in bank transfers or whether I had created something else, something colder, something hollow. Graham tried to talk me out of it. Too risky, he said. Too complicated at my age. There were other ways to assess character. But my mind was already made. I would disappear. I would strip away every marker of success and status. I would become nobody. A man with nothing to offer except need. And I would knock on my children's doors and see who opened them. To see who saw a father and who saw only inconvenience. The city lights glittered below me, each one representing someone heading home to family. I was about to discover whether I still had one. For days after my conversation with Graham, I barely recognized the man staring back at me from the mirror in a Salvation Army thrift store on Queen Street. 4 days. 4 days of deliberately dismantling everything I had spent 67 years constructing. The worn coat and stained trousers cost me $11. I stopped shaving. Stopped bathing. I rubbed grime into my hands until they no longer looked like the hands of a man who had signed contracts and shaken boardroom deals, but like hands that belonged to someone who worked outdoors in the cold. Someone invisible. By Monday night, the transformation was complete. I had learned what it truly meant to be unseen. I walked through the path system beneath downtown Toronto, that underground maze connecting office towers and shopping corridors. Men and women who once would have nodded respectfully at Richard Blackwood now stepped around me as if I were a pile of debris. A woman in a tailored wool coat pulled her daughter closer as they passed. A young professional in an expensive suit instinctively checked his wallet after walking by me. No one met my eyes. That night, I found shelter in a recessed doorway on Adelaide Street, wedged between a coffee shop and a closed retail space. Above me, the lights of the financial district burned bright. Through the windows of the office tower across the street, I could see people working late, faces illuminated by computer screens, silhouettes moving with purpose. Every one of them had somewhere to go when they were done. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe. Somewhere they belonged. The December cold seeped through every layer of clothing. I didn't sleep. On Tuesday, the second night, I met Walter. He was sitting on a bench at Union Station near the GO Transit platforms, his belongings stuffed into a worn hockey bag at his feet. Late 70s, white beard, weathered face, eyes that carried decades of stories no one had asked to hear. When he saw me settle onto a nearby bench, shivering uncontrollably, he reached into his bag and pulled out a Tim Hortons coffee cup, still half full and barely warm. "Here," he said. "You look like you need this more than I do." The simplicity of the gesture, an elderly man with nothing offering what little he had, hit me harder than the cold ever could. "Thank you," I said. We sat in silence, watching commuters rush past toward trains that would carry them to warm homes in Oakville, Burlington, Mississauga. Lives that continued forward, untouched by the margins we now occupied. "Been out here long?" Walter asked. "For days," I said. 12 years for me." His voice wasn't bitter. Just factual. "My kids stopped calling around year 3, he continued. "Said it was for my own good. Tough love, they called it." He stared ahead, not at me. "Funny thing about money," he added quietly. "Has a way of changing people. Makes them forget what matters." Those words stayed with me long after Walter settled into sleep on his bench, using the hockey bag as a pillow. A memory surfaced, sharp, unwelcome, painfully clear. Daniel at 7 years old, holding my hand as we walked downtown. Head pointed at a man sleeping in a doorway near King Street. "Dad, why does that man have to sleep outside?" "Because he made bad choices, son," ID said. "That's what happens when people don't work hard enough." Daniel had gone quiet for the rest of the walk. I remembered feeling satisfied with my answer. Proud, even. Teaching him responsibility. Teaching him how the world worked. Now, sitting on that bench at Union Station with 4 days of grime embedded in my skin and borrowed coffee warming my hands, I understood the cruelty of what ID said. The arrogance of it. That man in the doorway could have been a veteran. Could have lost everything to illness. Could have had children who abandoned him. He could have been Walter. He could have been me. By Thursday evening, I was ready. My body ached constantly. Hunger had become a dull background hum I barely noticed anymore. But I had learned what I needed to learn. Felt what I needed to feel. I had 3 addresses memorized. 3 children. 3 homes I had helped pay for. 3 chances to discover who they truly were when the man at their door had nothing to offer but need. Marcus lived in Yorkville, in one of those modern glass towers that had transformed the old village into a monument to wealth. It was after 9 when I reached his building, the walk from Rosedale taking nearly 2 hours through slushy December streets. The concierge nearly stopped me, but I slipped through behind a delivery driver. I found Marcus' unit on the 14th floor and pressed the bell. The door opened quickly. Marcus stood there in scrubs, phone in hand, clearly expecting someone else. His eyes swept over me with the rapid diagnostic gaze physicians develop, assessing, categorizing, deciding in milliseconds. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition struggling to surface. Then his expression settled into practiced neutrality. "Can I help you?" "It's me," I said. "It's Dad." I watched him process the information. Watched his eyes move from my face to my torn clothes, my unwashed hair, my cracked shoes. Watched him take a single step backward, not closing the door, but not opening it further either. "Dad?" His voice held doubt. "What happened to you?" "I lost everything. The company collapsed. Investments went wrong. I've been on the streets for nearly a week. I just need somewhere to stay." He didn't move. Didn't invite me in. Just stood there, blocking the warmth. "This is very sudden," he said. "Why didn't you call?" "I tried. You said you were in surgery. Then you didn't call back." Something tightened at the corner of his mouth. "I'm always in surgery," he said. I'm an orthopedic specialist. My patients are extremely important people. Corporate executives. Professional athletes. He hesitated, then added, if word got out that my father was, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. It's not about judgment, Dad, he continued. It's about perception. You understand how reputation works in my field. He pulled out his wallet. Italian leather, the one ID given him for his 45th birthday. He removed two $20 bills and held them out. Go find a shelter. Get cleaned up. Once you're presentable, we can talk properly. I have a procedure at 6 tomorrow morning. A hockey player's knee. Very high profile. I didn't take the money right away. I looked at my son, the man who had dedicated his life to repairing damaged bodies. I saw you on Tuesday, I said quietly. Outside Mount Sinai, around 5:30. He froze. You came out the Elm Street entrance. I was sitting against the wall near the parking garage. Our eyes met for 3, maybe 4 seconds. I see dozens of people outside that hospital every day, he said quickly. You crossed to the other side of the street, I replied. You chose not to look closer. Did you really not recognize your own father? Or did you decide stopping would be inconvenient? A muscle in his jaw twitched. Please take the money, he said. I want to help. But this isn't how. I took the $40. He closed the door before I had even turned away. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. The healer had diagnosed his own father as a reputational risk, something to be managed, minimized, made presentable before acknowledgement was possible. I stood in that carpeted hallway, two $20 bills resting in my palm like pieces of silver. Whatever sickness had taken hold of Stephanie had spread to Marcus as well. The same cold calculations. The same measuring of worth through appearance and status. My feet were bleeding now, blisters torn open from days of walking. But nothing hurt as much as the certainty settling into my chest. I had one child left. Daniel. The social worker. The one who chose purpose over profit. The one earning $43,000 a year helping kids no one else wanted. One more door. One last chance to find out whether I had raised even one child who remembered that people matter more than reputations. The house on Mortimer Avenue looked nothing like my other children's homes. It was nearly 11 when I found it in East York, a working-class neighborhood where houses sat close together and Christmas lights ranged from elaborate displays to a single strand hung along a porch rail. The walk from Yorkville took over an hour. My body moved on instinct alone, every muscle screaming for rest. Daniel's house was a modest wartime bungalow, red brick that needed repointing, a small front porch with a wooden railing. A string of multicolored lights framed the window, clearly hung by hand rather than by a professional service. No electronic gate. No luxury vehicle in the driveway. Just a 12-year-old Honda Civic parked on the street. And a welcome mat that read, "All are welcome here." This was it. My final chance. I climbed the 3 wooden steps and pressed the doorbell. Through the frosted glass of the storm door, I saw movement. Footsteps approaching. The door opened. A woman stood there. Claire. Daniel's wife. I'd met her perhaps a dozen times at family gatherings, occasions where Stephanie made subtle comments about her discount store clothes and Marcus barely acknowledged her existence. She wore a simple blue sweater and jeans, brown hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. No makeup. No jewelry except a thin gold wedding band. Her eyes met mine. And stayed there a heartbeat longer than I expected. Then she smiled. Not the polite, uncertain kind of smile people use when they're unsure what they're looking at, but something warm and immediate, the kind that opens before the brain even finishes calculating. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, stepping forward without hesitation. Her hand reached for my arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. You must be frozen. Please, come inside. Come in. And just like that, she pulled me into warmth. The house smelled like real life. Something savory simmering. Coffee. A hint of dish soap and laundry detergent. No perfume. No staged candles meant to impress. Just food and home and a quiet rhythm that didn't need an audience. The living room was small, the kind of small that forces people to actually share space. A worn couch with a throw blanket folded over the arm. Bookshelves made from planks and concrete blocks. Framed photos on the walls, birthdays, camping trips, goofy smiles, the kind of memories no one hires a photographer for. A Christmas tree in the corner decorated by hand, mismatched ornaments, strings of lights that didn't perfectly align, and somehow that made it more beautiful than anything I'd seen in Rosedale. Daniel, Claire called toward the kitchen, voice raised just enough to carry. Daniel, come here, please. He appeared a moment later wearing a flannel shirt and old jeans, as if he'd been in the middle of chopping vegetables or washing a pot. When he saw me, his face moved through a dozen emotions in a single heartbeat: shock, confusion, recognition, worry, and then something deeper that looked almost like pain. Dad? He said, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. Are you okay? Are you hurt? What happened? His hands landed on my shoulders, not to push me back, not to block a doorway, but to check me, like he probably checked the kids at the youth center every day. Looking for bruises. Looking for injuries. Looking for signs of harm. The immediate concern for my safety, rather than my appearance, hit me like a wave. His focus was on my well-being, not how my presence might reflect on him. And compared to Stephanie and Marcus, it was so stark, so profoundly different, that something cracked open in my chest. I lost everything, I managed. My voice barely sounded like my own. The company. The investments. Eve been on the streets for nearly a week. Daniel didn't step back. He didn't demand details. He didn't ask for a timeline or a spreadsheet or a reason. He simply pulled me into a hug. You're here now, he said quietly, holding on like he meant it. You're safe. That's what matters. Claire was already moving with the calm efficiency of someone who knows what to do when life gets hard. They'll start a bath, she said. Daniel, find some clean clothes and put the kettle on. I don't want to impose, I began. You are not imposing, she said, firm but gentle, the kind of firmness that doesn't humiliate you. Your family. 20 minutes later, I stood under hot water in their small bathroom and watched nearly a week of grime swirl down the drain. Clean towels waited on the rack. On the toilet lid sat folded clothes, Daniel's sweatpants and a well-worn Toronto Maple Leafs hoodie that had clearly been someone's favorite for years, fabric softened by 100 washes. When I emerged, dinner was waiting at their small kitchen table. Vegetable soup from scratch, served in a bowl with a small chip on the rim. Fresh bread, still warm. A glass of milk placed beside it like it was the most normal thing in the world. They sat with me while I ate. They made conversation, not forced, not performative. Daniel talked about the youth center. Claire talked about her job at the community library. She mentioned a Christmas pageant at the local church where she was helping with costumes. Simple things. Normal things. As though having someone at their table who'd been sleeping outside for days wasn't a scandal, wasn't a burden, just a situation that required care. When I finished, Daniel leaned back slightly and said, "You'll take the bedroom." Claire nodded. "We'll be fine on the couch." "No," I said immediately, the old instincts trying to reassert themselves. "I can't take your bed." "Dad." Daniel's voice stayed gentle but left no room for argument. "You're taking the bed. This isn't a discussion." Claire led me down the short hallway to their bedroom. It was small, barely enough room for a double bed and an old dresser. The sheets were worn soft from countless washings, the kind of softness money can't buy. A wedding photo sat on the nightstand. Both of them smiling with genuine joy. Claire in a simple white dress. Daniel in a borrowed suit. No extravagance, just happiness. "Sleep well," Claire said, touching my arm briefly. "You're safe here." They closed the door softly behind them. I lay in their bed, in sheets that smelled faintly of lavender fabric softener, and felt tears slide down my face. They hadn't asked what happened. Hadn't asked why. Hadn't asked what I could give in return. They'd simply taken care of me. 2 children with everything had given me nothing. 1 child with almost nothing had given me everything. I should have slept. My body was exhausted down to the bone. But the house was old, built 80 years ago, when insulation wasn't a priority, and through the thin walls I could hear voices drifting from the living room. Daniel and Claire talking quietly. And what I heard next broke something in me that had been holding together for 67 years. "We can't make it work this month," Daniel murmured, voice heavy with worry. "My paycheck barely covers rent and groceries as it is, and the Civic needs new brakes. The mechanic said we can't keep putting it off." A pause. Then Claire's voice, calm, steady, but carrying weight. "Eve been thinking about it. We could sell the locket." "No." Daniel's response was instant. "Claire, that locket means everything to you. It's a piece of metal with a photograph inside," she said, voice catching just slightly. "My grandmother gave it to me when she was dying," Claire continued, and I could hear the emotion rising in her throat. "She said her grandmother wore it when they immigrated from Ireland during the famine. She said it carried all our family's hope through impossible times." "Claire," Daniel said softly, "that's exactly why we can't sell it." "But it's still just a symbol," she replied. "The hope isn't in the metal. It's in what we do with our hands and our hearts." Her breath shook. "Your father is sleeping in our bed right now because he has nowhere else to go. The pawn shop on Danforth said they'd give us $300 for it. That's groceries for the month and enough to help him get back on his feet." Silence stretched. I pressed my fist against my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound. "Are you certain?" Daniel asked finally. "I'm certain," Claire said, and now she was crying, quietly, but I could hear it in her voice. "My grandmother came here with nothing but that locket and the clothes she was wearing. She would understand. She always said family comes first. That things are just things but people are everything." "I love you," Daniel whispered. "I love you too," she whispered back. "And we'll figure it out. We always do." I heard the creak of couch springs as they settled for the night. A few minutes later, Daniel's soft snoring began. Claire shifted now and then, likely unable to get comfortable. And I lay there in the dark, face wet, chest heaving with silent sobs. For 67 years, I had believed wealth was how you demonstrated love. That providing financially was the same as caring emotionally. That success meant giving your children everything they wanted. But this woman, this daughter-in-law my family had dismissed and subtly mocked for years, the woman Stephanie once referred to as Daniel's little librarian, was willing to sacrifice the one precious possession connecting her to generations of her family's history. Not for herself. Not even for Daniel. For me. For a man who had shown up on her doorstep in rags. Stephanie had closed her door to protect her social calendar. Marcus had handed me $40 to make me disappear. But Claire was prepared to pawn her grandmother's locket, an heirloom that survived the Irish famine and a transatlantic crossing, to help me. I didn't deserve any of it. Something fundamental shifted inside me that night, something I couldn't name. But as the old house creaked and settled around me, I understood with perfect clarity. I had been wrong about everything. I woke to the smell of coffee and toast. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains. Claire was in the small kitchen humming softly as she poured coffee into mismatched mugs. The table was set with toast, scrambled eggs, orange juice, simple, generous, warm. Daniel left for the center at 7, she told me, sliding a plate toward me. He has a crisis intake this morning. A 15-year-old who aged out of a group home. But he'll be back around 10 during his break. I sat down, the weight of what I'd heard the night before pressing on my chest. Claire, about the locket, she stopped moving. Turned to face me. We're not selling it, she said quietly. I thought about it all night. Well, find another way. I stared at her. This woman my family dismissed. This woman who was ready to give up an irreplaceable heirloom for a man she barely knew beyond my last name. Why did you let me in? I asked. She smiled again, the same warmth from the night before. Because you needed help, she said simply. Is that not enough of a reason? We ate in comfortable silence. Then she told me about Marcus Williams, a 14-year-old boy in one of Daniel's youth groups. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father had died in a construction accident 3 years earlier. No insurance. No pension. No compensation because someone had forged a safety certificate. Daniel uses his own money, Claire said quietly. About $200 every month. Making sure Marcus has winter clothes, transit fare, food when things are tight. He never told me that, I whispered. He wouldn't, she said, refilling my coffee. That's who he is. Then she sat down across from me and studied my face for a long moment, her eyes calm and attentive, like she wasn't judging, just observing. Mr. Blackwood, she said gently, something doesn't quite add up. My throat tightened. A man like you, she continued softly, with your experience, your connections, your knowledge. How does someone lose absolutely everything that quickly? No warning signs. No time to make arrangements. I couldn't speak. You don't have to answer, she added, voice kind. But I want you to know something. She paused, then said it, plainly, without drama. Even if this is some kind of test, we still would have opened that door every single time. The words hit me like a physical force. She knew. Or suspected. And she opened the door anyway. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The confession poured out, my staged disappearance, the fake collapse, the 58 million sitting untouched, the test I designed to see who my children were when I had nothing. I told her about Stephanie's closed door and the charity gala committee. About Marcus $40 and his high-profile knee surgery. About Walter at Union Station. About nearly a week spent invisible on Toronto streets. When I finished, Claire reached across the table and took my hand. You needed to know the truth, she said. I understand that. At 10:15, the front door opened. Daniel walked in, still wearing his winter jacket, snow melting in his hair. He looked at Claire, then at me, and I saw in his eyes he'd heard enough already. Claire must have texted him. Dad, he said, sitting down slowly. Are you okay? I shook my head. I honestly don't know. He sat beside Claire. What happens now? I was planning to confront Stephanie and Marcus today, I admitted. I was going to cut them out completely. Change my will. Disinherit them. Please don't, Claire said firmly. Don't make permanent decisions based on temporary pain, she continued. People can change. Give them a chance. Daniel nodded. They're still your children, Dad. They made terrible choices this week. But we've all made mistakes. Every one of us. I looked at these 2 people, a social worker and his librarian wife, living in a small rented bungalow in East York, scraping by on less than $50,000 a year combined. And I realized they possessed more wisdom than I had accumulated in 67 years of empire building. I pulled out my phone and called Graham Patterson. "Change of plans," I said. "Bring everything, the documentation, the security detail, the full package. But leave the will revisions in your office. I'm not making final decisions today." Graham began to argue, but I cut him off. "Just do it. We're meeting at my son's house in East York. 10:45. And contact Stephanie and Marcus," I added. "Tell them their father needs to see them immediately. Tell them it's urgent." When I ended the call, I looked at Daniel and Claire. In about an hour, Graham will arrive with his team and Stephanie and Marcus will have to face what they've been running from. The neighbors definitely noticed when two black SUVs pulled up to the curb on quiet Mortimer Avenue. Graham Patterson arrived at 10:45 with Robert, his senior associate, and 3 security personnel. Leather briefcases and manila folders came in with them, transforming Daniel and Claire's modest living room into something that felt like a boardroom. At 11:15, a silver Lexus and a black Audi pulled up behind the SUVs. Stephanie emerged in a camel cashmere coat, oversized sunglasses despite the gray December sky. Marcus followed in medical scrubs, exhausted and clearly irritated at being pulled away from work. When they stepped inside and saw me, still wearing Daniel's Maple Leafs hoodie and sweatpants, sitting between Daniel and Claire on the worn couch, Stephanie's hand flew to her mouth. "Daddy, sit down," I said. "Both of you." They perched awkwardly on the edges of kitchen chairs Claire pulled in, as if the furniture itself was unfamiliar to them. Graham cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. "Mr. Blackwood is not bankrupt," he said calmly, professionally. "His net worth remains approximately $58 million. All accounts are intact. There was no financial collapse, no failed investments, no company closure." Stephanie went pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup. "What do you mean, a test?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "A test. To see who you really are when I have nothing to offer you." "That's not fair," she choked out. "That's entrapment." "Fair." I cut in. "Graham. Show them the first document." Graham placed a phone record on the coffee table. Wednesday, December 11th. A 40-minute call from Royal Canadian Trust to Stephanie Blackwood Fraser. 3:17 p.m. Stephanie stared down at the paper. "Only there is no Royal Canadian Trust," Graham continued. "Not as an entity that would call regarding your father's affairs. Mr. Blackwood arranged that call. An actor reading from a prepared script." "This is insane," Stephanie said, voice rising. "No," I replied. "It's information. And what you did with it revealed who you are. You received a call suggesting your father had lost everything," I continued. "You didn't call me, Stephanie. You didn't ask if I was all right. You didn't offer help." My voice stayed steady. "You called your husband's attorney to ask about my will. To see if it had been changed." Silence filled the room. Then Stephanie began to cry, not delicate tears, not controlled sniffles. Deep, shaking sobs, as though something she had kept locked away for years had finally cracked open. I turned to Marcus. Monday, December 9th. 5:23 p.m. Outside Mount Sinai Hospital. Elm Street entrance. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. "You walked out after your shift," I said. I was sitting against the wall near the parking structure. Our eyes met for nearly 4 seconds. "I see hundreds of people outside that hospital every day," Marcus snapped. "You see them," I said quietly, "but you do not see them. You evaluated. You dismissed, just as I taught you. Just as I demonstrated for you over and over throughout your childhood." Marcus' composure shattered. He dropped his head into his hands. Daniel stood up from the corner of the room. "Dad," he said softly. "They learned this from you." The room went silent. Even Stephanie's sobbing quieted. "You measured us by numbers our whole lives," Daniel continued. "By grades. By salaries. By job titles. By the prestige of our work and the size of our houses." His voice wasn't angry. It was steady. Honest. "You taught us money was the same thing as love. You taught us success mattered more than kindness. You taught us worth could be calculated on a spreadsheet." He looked straight at me. "They didn't create these values out of nowhere. They learned them from watching you." The words landed harder than anything Stephanie or Marcus could have said. Because he was right, completely, devastatingly right. Stephanie's crying softened into quiet, broken breaths. Marcus sat frozen, staring at the worn carpet beneath his feet. I looked at the two people I had raised, and for the first time, I saw myself reflected in them, the same calculations, the same obsession with appearances, the same belief that wealth could substitute for genuine connection. I had shaped them in my own image. And now I was condemning them for becoming exactly what I trained them to be. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Finally, I turned toward Claire. Her brown eyes met mine with that same quiet strength I'd seen the night she opened her door. "You knew from the beginning?" I asked. "Yes," she said. Daniel turned to his wife, stunned. "What?" "I knew the moment I opened the door," Claire said, "and she didn't look away from me." "Your eyes never change, Mr. Blackwood. Clothes can be swapped. Hair can be altered. Hygiene can be masked or neglected. But the eyes, no matter what you do, keep telling the truth." "I recognize them," Claire said, steady as stone. Then she looked at Daniel, and her voice softened, not weaker, just warmer. "But I wanted your father to see something that night," she continued. "I wanted him to see that you would give up our bed, our food, everything we have, for someone you believed was a complete stranger." She let that settle in the small room like a candle being lit. "Not because he was your father," she added, "but because that is simply who you are." Then Claire turned back to me, and the truth in her eyes was almost unbearable. "You wanted to discover who loved you," she said. "But I wanted you to finally see who your son really is." Something inside me cracked. Not the neat kind of breaking you can explain later. The kind that changes you. And I didn't even try to hide it. My voice broke. For all these years I failed. Stephanie was crying again, but it wasn't the same kind of crying as before. This was something rawer. More honest. Like the sound had been trapped behind her ribs for decades. "I spent my whole life trying to be good enough for you, Daddy," she said, shaking. "The house, the clothes, the committees, the right schools for the children. I thought if I could just be successful enough, accomplished enough, you would finally see me. Finally be proud." Marcus swallowed hard. When he spoke, his voice came out rough, barely audible, like it had scraped on the way up. "You taught us that the numbers mattered," he said. "That results mattered. That everything else was sentiment." He looked down at the floor, at Daniel's worn carpet, as if he couldn't meet anyone's eyes yet. "I became what you showed me success looked like." I nodded slowly. I didn't have the luxury of denial anymore. "I know," I said. "And I built you this way." The words tasted like iron. "This failure belongs to me as much as it belongs to you." I drew in a slow breath and looked around that small living room, my 3 children, Graham and his team, the security men standing silently near the doorway, and Claire still holding my hand like she'd been holding the last piece of me together. "Hey Race, what happens next?" I said. "Stephanie. Marcus. You are not being removed from my will," I continued, watching their faces change. But there are conditions. Family therapy every week for at least 2 years. Real sessions. Real work. Community service. Meaningful time with people who have nothing. And genuine relationships with your brother and his wife. Not obligation. Not performance. Real presence. If you fail at any of this, I said carefully, then you will be cut out permanently. But I am giving you a chance to change. A chance I should have given myself decades ago. They signed. Then I turned to Daniel and Claire. And you too, I said, are getting a house. Whatever you want. Wherever you want. Up to $800,000, paid in full. This is not charity, I said firmly. This is acknowledgement. You showed me what family actually means. You earned this, not with ambition or calculation, but with a pot of soup and an open door. 1 week later, I found Walter. I arranged a small apartment. A maintenance job. A monthly stipend. He cried when I told him. Why me? He asked. Because you shared your coffee when you had almost nothing left, I said. Because kindness matters. 3 months later, I watched Stephanie volunteer at a food bank. Quietly. Genuinely. It was a small sign. But it was real. That evening, I sat with Daniel and Claire in their new home. The walls still needed paint. The floors still creaked. But the house was full of warmth. Money buys many things, I said quietly. But it does not buy the door that opens when you are at your lowest. It does not buy the hands that catch you when you fall. It does not buy love that asks for nothing in return. Those things come only from the heart, I continued. And I learned, at 67, that a heart willing to give everything is worth infinitely more than $58 million. Outside, snow fell softly over Toronto's East End. But inside, surrounded by 2 people who had taught me what family truly meant, I finally felt warm.